Should you control your offset smoker temperatures using your Firebox inlet damper or the stack exhaust damper? And does one of these methods result in smokier barbecue? We're gonna find out in this video, so let's get smoking. Welcome to the Smoke Lab. My name is Steve Gow, and on this show I do crazy barbecue experiments you would never do at home so you can learn from my trial and error. The great debate: is it better to manage your offset smoker temps with your intake damper on the Firebox side or your exhaust damper on the stack? Some people swear by the Firebox damper because it directly controls the flow of air to the fire, and other people swear at those people and they say, no, you have to use the exhaust damper to control your fire. So who's right? To find out, I'm going to smoke 2 racks of baby back ribs for 3 hours each. In one cook, I'm only going to use the Firebox inlet damper to control temps, and in the second cook, I'll only use the exhaust damper. After removing the membrane on these back ribs, I'm starting with a base layer of Oklahoma Joe's Nashville Hot Rub. This stuff is really good, actually. If you like spicy barbecue, it's got some heat and also some flavor. And then I'm doing a layer of my Let's Gow General Purpose Rub, which is perfect for pork. Then I flip the rack over, I repeat on the other side, and look at that. That's a very pretty ribby. Moving outside to my Oklahoma Joe's Longhorn offset smoker, I'm lighting about a quarter bag of charcoal briquettes with my Oklahoma Joe's charcoal lighter, and then I'm throwing a split on the coals to get things going. I'll let it get preheated for 30 minutes before I actually start the test. Fast forward 30 minutes later, I'm placing a rack of ribs on the smoker and an ambient probe right next to it at grate level where the heat hits the meat. That's where I like to measure the temperatures on my offset smoker. Now the stack damper is fully open, we're not touching that at all. And taking a look at the inlet damper, I'm fully closing it actually, the little swing damper, and using the entire Firebox door to control the airflow. I've cut little notches in the frame for the handle to fit into so I can precisely adjust the airflow. I find that little swing damper is hard to move to the exact same spot every time because you kind of swing it and it's based on tension. So I prefer to just use the Firebox door. Now this is a science show, kind of, so we need to collect some data. I'll be using these little clickers to count how many times I make a damper adjustment and also how many times I add fuel. I'm also going to use a stopwatch function on my phone to time the intervals between me going outside and adding fuel or making adjustments. And all of this data will help me compare whether one method is more or less convenient than the other. For example, if one method results in me going outside every 20 minutes to add fuel or make a damper adjustment, and the other method, I don't have to go outside for 30 minutes in between doing each one of those things, then the one with 30-minute intervals I would consider more convenient. Personally, I have 2 young kids running around the house these days, so I don't have a lot of time to sit out by the smoker and constantly adjust the temperatures. So what I do is I add some wood or make an adjustment, then I go inside for 15-20 minutes, do other things while I'm looking at my phone and monitoring the temperatures, and then whenever the temperatures dip, I head outside again and then I add more fuel or I make a damper adjustment. So for example, I'm aiming for 300 degrees as my target temperature, so if it gets up to 305, 310, I head outside and then I shut the damper down to restrict airflow to the fire and lower the temperatures. Then I head back inside. And then once it gets down to maybe 195, 190, I can see that temperature graph starting to dip. I'll head outside and I'll either open the damper, or if it needs more fuel, I'll add more fuel. And every time I add fuel or make a damper adjustment, clickety click, I click my little clicker to collect that data point. All right, I'm out here by the Oklahoma Joe's, and it's about 2 hours into the first test. One observation I've made so far is that this isn't very scientific and it's very hard to be precise about it. Every time that I open the Firebox and adding fuel, I'm clicking this little guy. So I've added fuel 7 times and I've been out here 6 times to make adjustments. So I'm gonna add fuel and it's going pretty strong, but the temperature is pretty low. I'm having temperature swings, and what I've noticed is that I'm getting temperature swings when I'm less attentive. So I've been inside to take a call, I've edited some videos, I've studied for a class that I'm taking right now, and I'm always running in and out, and sometimes when I am not as attentive, the temperature dips down and it takes a really long time to get it back under control. So it makes me wonder, is the data that I collect from this experiment going to actually be valuable, or is the truth of the matter just that if you want to get good results, then you just have to be more attentive. TBD on that one. After the 3-hour test, the ribs are at around 165 to 175 internal, so I'm taking them off the smoker and wrapping them in foil. Then I'm putting them in my oven at 300 degrees to finish them. I could finish them on the smoker, but I need the smoker for the next test, so that's why I'm putting them in the oven. Okay, test number 2, controlling temps with the exhaust damper this time. I'm placing my ribs on the smoker just like before, but this time the Firebox door is going to stay wide open and I'm not touching it at all. Instead, I'll be adjusting the exhaust damper. And because the Firebox door is wide open, I have to start with the damper about 3/4 shut to limit airflow and reduce the temps to 300, which is what I'm aiming for. A few minutes later, I'm waiting for those temps to come down a little bit, and I'm still running a little bit hot. You can see it's around 311 degrees, a little bit too high, so I'm closing the exhaust damper down even more to lower the temps, and then I'll open it up and add more fuel once it gets too low, and so on, until I get roughly an equilibrium and the temperature stabilizes at 300. And already I noticed this method creates quite a bit more smoke because I need to limit the airflow so much to get the right temperatures. And the fire is smoldering slightly when you do that, and also more smoke is lingering in the cook chamber because it can't get out. So this is probably going to result in smokier meat, but we'll see. Now, once the temp gets below 295, I'll be adding a few handfuls of charcoal and a very small wood split. And then I open the damper to about 1/4 open again to raise the temperatures. And then once it gets to roughly 300 and stabilizes there, I'll shut the damper down to lock in that temperature, and so on and so on. 3 hours later, I'm temping the ribs and they're around 180 to 190, which is a lot higher than the other rack, by the way. And then I'm wrapping it. Looking back at the data, I was running this test at about 8 degrees hotter on average, but this faster cooking is consistent with other tests I've done. I found that when you use the exhaust damper to control temperatures, and in particular when you shut down the exhaust damper quite a bit, it speeds up the cook because you're lowering the convection currents, so they're encompassing the meat a lot more uniformly. They're not all just up at the top of the cook chamber flowing over top of the meat. And also you're slowing down the airflow so you get less evaporative cooling, so you get faster cooking meat and potentially juicier meat because it raises the humidity in the cook chamber because there's less airflow. After another 1 or 2 hours at 300 degrees, the ribs are bending easily and probing tender, so I'm taking them out, I'm slicing them, and I'm doing a quick taste test for smoke flavor. The ribs smoked during the exhaust damper test were much smokier, but no surprises there. I could visibly see more smoke being produced throughout that entire test. Then I'm saucing the ribs with some Meat Mitch Womp sauce, and I'm going to serve them up to my family later tonight. I'm just cleaning up here after cooking those ribs, and I had a thought. I looked at the data, and at first I thought, oh man, it's really going well with the outlet damper, and it looked like I was having steadier temperatures. It seemed to me that I was going outside less often and there was less touch points. But when I looked at the data, it turned out that I was going outside exactly as much as the previous experiment. So it just goes to show you think something and then you form an opinion about it. And if I didn't collect the data, I might have said to you guys, hey, this outlet damper method works way better than the Firebox damper method because it's more convenient because I was going outside less. But that was all anecdotal, and when I actually looked at the data, that turned out to be completely untrue. So I'm really glad that I collected the data, and this experiment went a lot better than I thought it would. So which method is better, the Firebox inlet damper method or the exhaust damper method? Well, let's look at the data. On average, I was able to maintain close to my target temperature of 300 degrees with about 21 degrees of standard deviation for the Firebox damper test. The higher the standard deviation, the less accurate I was with maintaining my target temperature of 300. So this isn't exactly correct, but you could think of a standard deviation of 21 degrees as I was probably within plus or minus 21 degrees of that target temperature of 300 degrees. And for the exhaust damper test, the standard deviation was higher at 23 degrees. So comparing those numbers, what it means is that I was able to maintain steadier temperatures using the Firebox door as opposed to the exhaust damper. Number of visits to the smoker was the same for each test, surprisingly. I thought one was easier than the other, but it turns out based on the data that it wasn't. The average time for going out to the smoker for each test was 11 minutes, both exactly the same. and each test had roughly the same amount of touch points for actually doing something like adding fuel or adjusting the damper. So surprisingly, no method was more convenient than the other, but the Firebox damper test had a slight edge because it had slightly steadier temperatures. The biggest difference I observed was that the ribs cooked using the exhaust damper were much more smoky, probably because when you close the exhaust damper, it limits airflow and it causes the smoke to linger more in the smoke chamber, which will attach to the meat more, and with less airflow, then the fire might start to smolder and create some of those more smoky flavors. I also noticed that the ribs cooked faster, probably because the airflow is slower and the convection currents are pushed lower. So basically it operates more like an oven when you shut down the exhaust. The airflow slows down, you get more moisture buildup and more smoke buildup, and the heat gets pushed down further in the cook chamber because it's not just all going up and over the meat and out the stack really quickly, it's getting blocked, pushed back, there's some back pressure, and so the convection currents are getting pushed down below grate level. So you get some more even cooking, you get some more humidity in the cook chamber, and the meat tends to cook a little bit faster, in my experience, based on the tests that I've done, including this one. So which method is best? Well, it really depends on your preferences. If you're only using charcoal, then controlling with the exhaust damper might be a good idea because you're not getting a ton of smoke with only charcoal anyway, so having a bit more smoke buildup in the cook chamber isn't going to oversmoke your food. So if you're using all charcoal, it might be a good way to get more humidity in the cook chamber, cook your meat faster, and cook your meat a little bit more evenly. On the other hand, if you don't like super smoky or arguably over-smoked barbecue, then it's probably a good idea to use your Firebox intake damper or the door itself on the Firebox because you'll get a cleaner burning fire, you'll get less smoke lingering in the cook chamber and attaching to the meat, and you'll get cleaner smoke flavors on the meat itself. So personally, because I often don't use charcoal at all, I just use all wood splits, I like to use the Firebox inlet damper because I get cleaner smoke flavors on my meat. Because of all the smoke that I'm producing by using all splits, I think that controlling the fire with just the exhaust damper would oversmoke my barbecue. But it's all personal preference, and I encourage you to try both methods and see which one works for you. If you guys have any ideas for future Smoke Lab videos, let me know in the comments section below. I will see you in the next video, and until next time, happy smoking.